All right. Welcome all of you one more time. I think it's a pleasure. So when we are miking up Balaji, he should be here any minute. This was a discussion. We call it a CEO panel to get the perspective of two of the great leaders that we have in the room, right? The idea is to sort of have a conversation around what are workforce strategies and what it means to all of us. Thank you, Balaji.
Thank you, Rajesh.
Sorry that it took a while for us to get you mic'd up and everything. But, I thought for the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to have a conversation. So we're not going to have it's not even scripted in some sense. And in fact, I just met Satya just 5 minutes ago, so he doesn't even know what I'm going to ask him anyway. So, but he said, I don't have a problem. I can talk to whatever you're going to ask me for, right? So that's okay. But look, we have two great perspectives, and the reason why I'm excited today more than normal is that they both come from a different spectrum of leadership of IT industry in some sense. Clearly, Balaji runs a fairly large GCC, and it's been built over a period of time, and in terms of size, etc. And I'm presuming Professor Satya comes from a very different background and perspective. Clearly academia, but it's also more about startups and what you've been able to build in the world of aeronautics and all of this. So very, very interesting perspective, very interesting thought process around workforce strategy. So let's, before we go too much into that, I just want to get back to both of them because we are here to hear them, not me. But I must say that we are actually in an era of disruptions. That's for sure. I mean, you will find that nobody would argue that we are in as I mentioned before in my introductory remarks, it's about, any technological discontinuity creates this kind of opportunities or challenges for the workforce. How do we build it? What are the skill set that we need to have? All of this sort of goes back to square one, and then sort of we are building it in some sense. And the best way to ask is that, is your talent forward compatible? How much of the talent that you have are actually going to be forward compatible in terms of what is required for the future in some sense. So that's the topic of the day as well. Yeah. So let me start with Balaji, and then I'll get to Professor Satya in a minute. Look, Citi has been one of the most successful GCCs, as all of you, those of you who are familiar with what they do. And actually, we had Satya and I caught up earlier, and I said, look, Citi always had a love-hate relationship with India. So he corrected me, saying that no, it's more love than the hate, right? The reason why I mentioned is that if you people who know Citi and then what they've been doing in India for the last 30, 40 years, they've had, they built up those, one of the original, the equivalent of a GCC, if you may, then of course sold it off to a provider, and then sort of build it back after 4 years. And so it was very fascinating in terms of understanding what made them sell and what made them buy back, etc. So we'll deal with that when we go to Balaji. But currently they have 31,000 people in the country, which is, but what is more astonishing is that he says that he's running it with 5% attrition rate, which all of us would love to have, right? I know when you have a 5% attrition rate, I think, those of the HR leaders in the room, I'm sure you think, wow, how did you achieve that? So we have to ask Balaji a little bit more. But one thing what he told me struck with me very, very well. And he said, they never hire for a job, they hire for a career. So these are the, aspects of what they do, which clearly, make them a leader. But let me start with, Balaji, and to sort of give us a sense of what is your workforce strategy broadly, and then what really makes you successful in what you do. So, Balaji.
Thank you, Rajesh. I just want to spend 30 seconds to reflect on what Rajesh talked about as the era of disruption in the perspective of my own career. Now, I spent 15 years abroad across various global capitals, and I came back to India a little over 10 years ago. And the reason I came back is I was enthused and energized by the opportunity India had to be the global GCC center of the world. So India went through the IT revolution. In the last 10 years, I really feel privileged to have been part of the GCC revolution, where India is today the world's GCC central. Coming to Rajesh's question, I think our workforce strategy has been built around 4 pillars. scientific demand estimation, forward-looking demand estimation. Second, translating that into concrete supply and resourcing requirements. Third, skill development. And fourth, organizational design. And that's where the India story has fit in beautifully, because India has the forward-facing skills and an aspirational workforce that absorbs skill development very well. So what we do is an annual talent planning process. This identifies talent who are ready for future growth, both within the business and across the franchise. And when you marry that with the overall picture of long-term demand, resourcing, and skills, you get a matrix which tells you what kind of work is required to be done in the future, who will do it, what skills are required to do it, and what does the organization have to do in terms of support and design elements to enable that transition. This plays out every year, and it's worked well for us. He talked about 5% attrition, and I tell you the reason. That concept of hiring for a career rather than a job is super important. I have done 12 different jobs in Citi myself in 28 years. I've never felt like I'm in the same company for 28 years. It's like being in 12 different companies. So we have a huge emphasis on mobility of people. We hire you for a certain role, yes. Everyone is eligible to apply for another role after 1 year. All our roles are internally posted. So there's a lot of lateral mobility which happens. There's a lot of vertical mobility. And that conscious encouragement from a corporate level is hugely important, because every employee who joins knows this is the breadth of opportunity I have to move across jobs in Citi. Over a 10-year period, most of our talented young people would have covered at least 5, 6, 7 different roles. That's why they don't need to go out and look for opportunities. If you're bored of what you're doing today, or if you want growth, or if you want to learn something new, the company offers it internally. Having that message from the top is very important, and we actually have, Rajesh, if I can end with one example, a 2x2 matrix. What that means is that anybody who's actually selected for a job internally can move within 2 months to that job. And anybody who's completed 2 years in the current role is actually encouraged to look for opportunities. So the messaging from the top is in fact not about stability. It's about planned growth, planned change, planned mobility. And that's why I think our employees have recognized the value of staying with Citi, and our attrition levels are so low today.
Great point that you mentioned. Sorry, I have a follow-up question very quickly on what you just now said. How do you convince, let's say a manager has got whatever, 30, 40 people working for him or her, and then you come back and say, I'm going to take your best people and move them into a different teams within Citi. And how do you get them to accept that?
So it's a two-way process. You don't just lose people, you gain them. It's almost like the old marriage proverb, right? You're gaining your son-in-law rather than losing your daughter. Something like that. But people have got used to the two-way process. What does matter, though, is messaging from the top. Because if we leave it to an individual manager, they may or may not encourage their employees to move around. So having a supportive corporate culture, messaging it to all employees, creating the systemic opportunities. For example, if there's a job post, everybody can apply for the job post. They don't need permission to apply for it. Wonderful. If you have finished 1 year on the job, you can apply for it. Creating that supportive environment makes sure the managers also automatically adapt to it. And it's personally good for the manager. Who knows? The manager might be the one moving as well.
No, I think it's a phenomenal takeaway. I mean, don't hire for a job, but hire for a career, which says a lot. But let me ask Satya, how different, look, Satya, you come obviously from an academic background, clearly a very, very successful entrepreneur on your own merits, and also have been an advisor to many of the startups that you've been able to take them off the ground literally in terms of the stages of in what they do. But when you look at talent strategy, it may be very different from what Balaji talked about. It's a very structured environment where you got multiple, you're looking at multiple startups, and you need a CEO at one point in time. You might need a driver in the other end. How do you look at this talent strategy?
And we are learning on the job. We have been told by everybody that these are three different animals, the DNAs are different and all that stuff. Yeah, fine. We got to do what you got to do. Right? We got to get people who can run these different aspects of our organization and so on. Well, what we are probably good at the moment that I can talk about is to be able to assemble the core engineering team. And there, I take inspiration from what Elon Musk does at Tesla, right? So at least for a very long time, he's supposed to have actually interviewed every person that actually becomes a part of the team.
Is that a good idea though, Satya? Do you think the
Up to
CEO
some,
should be...
I don't know where to stop it, right? But for example, at ePlane, last night I was actually talking to somebody who was actually getting 3.8 LPA in some other EV industry company. I don't want to name that. And then, so we decided to actually bump up his salary to 7 LPA and so on. We thought that he's actually pretty good. But I spent about an hour listening to him, not talking to him, listening to him.
Exactly.
Right? So, and then we made an offer. So, and as a CEO, and then he was wondering, why is the CEO talking to me? Right? And I'm like, no, that's what we need to do in order to be able to put a team together.
Right.
And I personally, specifically look at this slogan that he talks about, which is, we're not actually giving a job, we're actually offering a career. And that's something super important for people who joined very early and then got stuck in the brass tacks. And I need to essentially be able to pull them out of what they are doing and then put them in the forefront of where we are heading. Because the kind of changes that we go through in an organization in the early stages of our companies is really vast. And how do I essentially get these guys to actually think ahead by 2 to 3 years and then prepare themselves for it so that they can then shine in their careers within the company instead of actually thinking about going elsewhere, right? That's actually a huge burden. That's what actually keeps me awake.
So my takeaway, Satya, is that you're saying the fundamentals are not very different, whether you're a small startup versus a large established company, but then the way you go about it may be very different. And in your case, I think you can afford to interview everybody. For example, our company has 365,000 people, and if the CEO decides to interview everybody whom we're hiring, that's not a very... That's a dead-on arrival.
Can't happen beyond a certain stage.
But, a related topic was with, in your industry especially, with the onset of artificial intelligence in general, of course, generative AI in particular, in terms of all of the stuff that we saw in the recent past. How do you define, of course, the topic we talk about is all this, how do you make sure that you're building an intelligent and sustainable workforce? So in your mind, Satya, what do you think are the characteristic of an intelligent workforce?
I think in today's world in general and in a startup world in particular, particularly deep tech startups, if you have to very specifically look at it like the aerospace startups where there is significant amount of discipline that is required in developing these things. It's initially actually somewhat chaotic because we have to start with some brilliant ideas in the first place and with a core set of people, maybe about a handful of them. But pretty soon we actually are hiring more and more people. And as we do that, we have to actually develop processes in place for knowledge transfer, knowledge retention, and knowledge management, and so on. And we can't actually make this very overbearing on these techies who came here to think that they can actually tinker with it and get something to work. But we have to tell them, boss, if you're actually trying to fly a rocket or make a plane which will carry people, right? You can't just tinker something and get it to work. You have to actually follow a process. So there is certain amount of respect that we have to actually get them to, develop for the work that they do over time. And that's actually an extremely painful process that we have to go through. We can't hire a CEO, a seasoned CEO to run a 2-year-old startup because he or she is actually going to be extremely overbearing with their knowledge and experience. So I don't know what's actually the right recipe, but the successful companies come out of this chaos. That's all I can tell you.
No, but a little more structured and crystallized process for the large organization. And of course, again, and this is something which I'm attributing to Balaji in terms of how we looked at forward compatible is probably the word you used as well. How do you see that, in building an intelligent workforce, especially given that, you also need now people to use technology more than, just doing everything by themselves. So is there a structure that you use, Balaji, or is it something which you do differently compared to what Satya was explaining?
See, for me and for the company, the way we define an intelligent workforce is, I would say, 4 attributes: adaptable, aspirational, mobile, and diverse. These are the 4 key attributes one would look for. I already spoke about mobility, so I won't repeat myself. But just to touch upon 2 of the other attributes. When I talk about adaptable, One can also call it forward compatibility. Now, it's not about a specific set of skills because that changes. It changes every year to the next year. The skills I was trained on 25 years ago are different from what I tend to use today. But a set of characteristics about adaptability is very important to build in the workforce. And that's where positive messaging about change is hugely important. Change can be disruptive or it can be positively embraced. So building positive messaging around change and how it allows for transformation and development of careers rather than destroying careers is very important from the top. Then providing employees with the right opportunities to keep learning. And this I think most companies do in different forms. We have an online university, but there are 3 levels of learning we adopt. One is global for our management development programs. And that's pretty much templated across the globe because these are best practices across the entire company. The second level is at each individual business unit level where we train for functional skills. And the third level is democratic. It's at each site, like the site I have right next door here. Employees can choose through a learning council what they want to learn. And we just enable and facilitate that. So if you look at these 3 levels, what it means is employees do get abilities to reskill themselves over a period of time. It's a continuous organic process. This is what I mean by adaptable. The other attribute I just want to stress for a minute is to build diverse perspectives. I think this is extremely important in a country like India. Now, gender diversity was our challenge for many years. It still is a challenge at middle and senior levels. And I can tell you one small instance of this, Rajesh, if I can take 30 seconds on this.
Please.
We realized that in India, we have a lot of women entering the workforce, but they drop off after marriage and maternity. So you don't have enough women at the middle and senior levels, especially in IT and GCCs, by the way. And then when we dug a little deeper, we realized COVID gave us a tremendous opportunity. So today we have a program called Maternity Flex. Now, maternity leave in India is 6 months. That's legally mandated. But after that, the new mother can work from home for another 1 year, which is pretty much till the kid goes to preschool. Just introducing this is helping us to stem attrition at that level. So this is an example of how one can build diversity, and there are multiple axes of diversity, much beyond gender. Building those diverse perspectives also make the workforce more intelligent. So these are the attributes I wanted to stress on, Rajesh.
Beautiful. I think you kind of laid out the sort of a framework, if you may. It reminds me of a recent, when NVIDIA now sort of become such a popular company, and so obviously its CEO, Jason, has also become very popular. Used to actually, 3-4 years ago, nobody knew what NVIDIA was and what they're doing. And then, of course, we used to get him to speak in some of our NASSCOM conferences and so on and so forth. So he spoke at I think it was Stanford graduation or something like that. And he mentioned something around hardships and sufferings are the only way to innovation. And of course, he's talked about resilience as the very critical factor of an organization's success. So do you, both of you, believe resilience and the culture of adaptability, and how do you really go through when you fall, you get up and then sort of go again? So is that an element of the broader workforce that you want to instill upon, or make sure that is that something which you want your people to have? You want to start? Yeah. Either way. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, resilience is something that has to be a natural ingredient to a startup because this is just a plant that's been, like a sapling that's been planted, and it has to actually become like a creeper that can hold on to something and then grow up and up. And in changing times, like we had COVID, then the post-COVID, and then we have the Russian-Ukraine war, the funding winter, all kinds of stuff. So we have to figure out how to pivot. And pivoting is actually something that's very fundamental to startup survival. The more important thing in the context of our discussion here is to how to message this to the people who are in the company. So we have had situations where we have to kind of chase changing goalposts, and we have to show more intermediate milestones, for investors, as well as try to go to market with, let's say, subscale products that we can find product market fit for, and then align ourselves. So the subscale prototypes were supposed to be technology demonstrators, but we now suddenly say, hey, is it possible for us to actually go to the market with this? And that means that we have to work on a product market fit for those prototypes. And so I did this for the sake of actually going to the bigger prototype, but I didn't mean to go sell this. And now if somebody have to go sell this, I have to find customers who will buy this, or I have to actually adapt this to customers.
But
that's not
Satya,
so
how
easy.
do you make sure that when you're hiring either a CEO or somebody for your startup, how do you make sure that they have the resilience in them?
Good. So Naval Ravikant told me this, by the way, right? So he said that that's what Elon Musk did. He hired people selling a dream, saying that he's actually going to make the most fantastic cars, and then he did that for a while, and then he then got back to making cars that's actually driven by most people, and that's typically what we do. Like so at ePlane, for example, I hire people saying that we have to make planes, but well, today we'll actually make the drones before we make the planes. Right? So I think we should be able to straddle the dreams for the future versus the immediate necessity, and that's a quality that we need to impart to our people. And some of them actually get frustrated, but we have to work on them and say, hey, it's important for us to actually do this today before we can get there, and so on. So these are survival strategies that I can think of. I think being nimble is actually super important for any organization in any changing times, and definitely so for startups, yeah.
Certainly. Balaji, what do you think?
I'm going to be a little contrarian here. To me, okay, there's operational resilience and all that, which is fine. But when it comes to people, resilience almost has a connotation of something negative because you're reacting to a crisis, you're resilient to a problem or a crisis. I think we should turn that around. With people, it's not about resiliency. I think people are inherently resilient, most people. I think it's more about messaging and facilitating that growth in a more positive way than talking about resilience to change and disruption. I think companies need to enable constant learning, like I said, but also, things like creating an atmosphere of psychological safety. And by the way, most managers in my firm are trained on how to create an atmosphere of psychological safety. Providing the right wellness backup, because sometimes there are, for example, during COVID, mental wellness was a problem. So providing the right wellness tools through the corporate. These are enabling and hygiene factors that the corporate has to put in. But beyond that, I think the dialogue has to be more about growth, about embracing the future, rather than trying to be resilient or status quo.
Sounds good. But I know our time is up, but we want to see if we can take maybe one question, if you have any of you have. Yeah, can you go there? If you can give him a mic, please, if you don't mind. I know that we're going to take maybe a couple more minutes to wrap this up. Yeah, the mic is coming from the back, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Just introduce yourself as well. So
my name is Dr. C. N. Narayan. I'm a professor of change in the group director for Sri Krishna Group of Institution, Coimbatore. The question is, I've been teaching planning growth is slightly easier, and planning mobility is also easier. Planning change is the most difficult thing practically, because a lot of resistance is there. How do we really ensure that technology comes into play in this, whether AI can play a role of slowly changing people to adapt to different situations? Because you talked about automatic adaptation, which is not really happening practically. So how do we address this issue in those three curves you mentioned, sir? Global curve, functional, and also about democratic curve.
So I'm not sure I got the entire question.
Do you want to say the gist of your question one more time?
Yeah, you talked about the curves, right? How do we connect first AI to this change? Through AI, can we make changes slowly? Because
through AI, can one make change slowly?
Yeah.
I think AI is it's a transformational technology, but let me put it in a little bit of context. While AI will certainly up the game in many ways across firms, especially in my sector, banking, what AI will do, in my opinion, is be transformational but not necessarily disruptive. There's a huge difference between the two, because if you look at what people do, we confuse tasks and jobs, right? What AI will do is simplify, automate tasks. That frees up time to do your overall job better. Now, does that mean AI will not take away jobs? No. Some jobs will certainly disappear because of AI. There's no doubt about it. I think every one of our companies are running proof of concept on AI, deploying it. We will see the productivity gain. But by and large, I see AI as delivering on task elimination, not on job elimination. So the task for a company, the challenge for a company is, how do you bring people to a level where they can work with AI to improve the day-to-day productivity? How can they coexist? That human-machine interaction we keep talking about, AI is a perfect example of it. And if you have been following the recent research on AI, what research indicates in the US, the Forrester study, which is one of the biggest studies done on AI, it was released about 6 months ago. For every one job that gets eliminated due to the impact of Gen AI, they expect 6 jobs will get positively transformed. I think that's going to be true across the globe as well. So what we have is probably the beginning of a multi-year opportunity to leverage AI to improve our productivity, improve our efficiency and profitability, but also improve people's day-to-day working style.
Thank you, Balaji. We'll take one last question and wrap this up. Yeah.
My name is Hari Akiraju. I'm from Hyderabad. I will be telling you 3 scenarios. I just wanted to hear your views on this.
Can we just do with one scenario maybe for today? Or
Yes.
Next two for the next two?
I'll plug all these 3 into one scenario part of it.
Yes, please. Yeah.
One is from the moonlighting perspective, employees have their own vision. Second, every organization believes that when the person is onboarded as an employee, they feel that they take the complete ownership of the person. Third part, there is a gap in the industry versus the colleges and the talent pool perspective. So now I think, given this AI field altogether, being an AI practitioner, AI is the most misused term today, everywhere people talking about. Having said that, now, for organizations, time has come to open up the door and look at how we can solve the scarcity of the talent pool right now. Having said this statement, can you give me some light about how the futuristically the organization is going to play the role in this?
Satya, do you want to take a crack at it? And then maybe Balaji?
I think the answer is kind of embedded in the question. So I think in the future of the 21st century, to think of an organization-oriented approach actually could be different than a individual specific approach. So the deal about moonlighting and all those things is because of the second part scenario that you said, that the organization thinks that they actually own the employee. But I think increasingly everything is actually going to be on demand, which means that the employees are actually going to be looking at their employment as on demand. And so we have to actually be looking at each and every person. It should be a person-specific approach rather than an organization-specific approach. I think the mass way of looking at people has to go. We need to actually be able to customize the jobs and the careers for each of those people. And that's the challenge that HR teams will be facing increasingly when they have to actually keep in mind the aspirations of each of those employees. And I think it's possible to actually use AI to be able to customize careers for each of those employees. If they want to moonlight, we should actually allow them to do that and those kinds of things. Right? This will increasingly be the case, I would believe, instead of having an organization-centric approach.
I'll just take 30 seconds. I know there's a big red screen warning me time is up. I'll just share one experience on the third element you raised, and I'll end with that. I had the chance about a year ago to meet with the principals of about 30, 40 engineering colleges in Tamil Nadu at a meeting organized by Guidance. And I was actually stunned when I walked out of the meeting, because most of the principals, and these are principals of big engineering colleges, they had very, very little idea about what was fintech. Somebody said they had heard about the word fintech for the first time. So imagine the students. But what I realized in that meeting, it's not the college's fault. It's not the faculty and the principal's fault. The industry, and I would admit culpability of companies like mine, we use colleges to hire people, right? We benefit from that ecosystem. How much have we really given back to it? How much have we provided the linkage back, not just hired it from the 4th year? Have we gone back to the 3rd year, the 2nd year, even to high school? Have we built training along with industry? Have we refreshed curriculums correctly? I don't think we've done enough in that respect, and I think there's much more scope for industry to partner with academia if we really have to make people employable, which has been a core industry concern. So the ball is also in our court.
Right. Thank you, Balaji. But thank you for the question, because I know that's particularly seemed to be an issue around Hyderabad, especially, right? With all this moonlighting, etc. But I think our time is up, so we probably want to wrap this up. But I want to give a big round of applause for both Balaji and Satya for what they've been able to do. Thank you, gentlemen.
For more content on tech and leadership, Subscribe to NASSCOM YouTube channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update.